Thank you, Haralambe, for your insights on harnessing technology into energy. We will now hear from Mrs. Anna Koukkides-Procopiou, former Minister of Justice and Public Order in Cyprus and President of POLITIA think tank. Mrs. Procopiou will touch upon geopolitics and delve into the question, Eastern Mediterranean, is balance a power in flux? And what an incredibly timely question. Please welcome Anna to the podium.
Good morning. Well, it is a very pertinent question because everything is in flux as we speak. And probably you've heard the news. Iran hit Israel last night, and Israel and the States. President Biden made a statement saying that the Americans and the Israelis are carefully considering their response. So, not a very pleasant time to discuss geopolitics. But let me get to the points I'd like to make about the geopolitical framework, which is always the anchor in which any kind of cooperation, be it in energy or anything else, that we're discussing. Borders in our area, many currently under dispute, still reflect the division of the Ottoman Empire among the victors of World War I, with disregard of natural frontiers, of human geography, of ethnic or sectarian divisions on the ground. Their newfound man-made borders, still to this day, which follow much of the Sykes-Picot line, product of the 1916 secret treaty between the British and the French, with the consent of Italy and Russia, to divide territories of the Middle East into spheres of influence via the principle of the balance of power. These territories included Palestine, Jordan, Iraq, Turkey, Syria, and Lebanon. This equilibrium, this pre-agreed balance of power between colonial powers, was upset when Italy and Germany decided that it was time for its revision. The end of World War II and the atrocities of the Holocaust brought about the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, as well as the division of Europe by an iron curtain into East and West via the Yalta Percentages Agreement between Churchill and Stalin. Spheres of influence were once more agreed and maintained, gradually spreading to the rest of Eurasia and the world. Once more, dual hegemony by consent, balance of power. The end of the Cold War in 1990 made America and the West the victors. American international relations scholar and former State Department official Francis Fukuyama described this as the end of history, paraphrasing Karl Marx's dictum that human history is the history of class struggle. Practically speaking, the history of struggle against capitalism. This struggle was now gone. Capitalism had won once and for all. US foreign policy hawks were eager to promote democracy and the liberal market model as universal values, one cap to fit all. The implosion and demise of the Soviet Union led to a monopolar world, where the loser was too weak to be asked for consent. Power is as power does, and the weak suffer what they must. But nowadays, we're living not the end of history, but its revenge. A new Middle East is being formed as we speak, in a gradually evolving MENA region, where the pre-existing balance of power is coming to an end. As American hegemony is challenged by an array of new contenders, including foes like Iran, Russia, and China, and even friends like Turkey. The power vacuum created by an ambivalent America, stating that it wished to pivot away from a region and attempting to lead from behind, depending on proxies, and removing as many boots from the ground as possible, is gradually being filled by others. In foreign policy analysis, in political risk analysis, the concept of the balance of power is often described in terms of game theory, in terms of a Nash equilibrium, That is a situation where ceteris paribus, no player could gain by changing their own strategy. A compromise when long-term goals and policies remain fixed by all players, based on the predisposition of underlying implicit consent, aimed at maximizing one's gains subject to one's individual and collective constraints and capabilities. However, the consent or even compliance by weaker parties to American hegemony is coming to an end. Revisionist tendencies are on the rise as the various players feel that they could come to gain by changing strategy. And as equilibrium is trying to re-establish itself, conflict and tension are on the rise too. The complexities of the world we live in, interconnectivity, interdependence, and the exponential phenomenal growth of technology and AI have contributed to polycrisis, simply put, imperfect storms, which can be analyzed and understood only by complex multidimensional and multi-layered analytical tools, not in traditional binary terms. Let's now attempt to zoom in. Who can forget the rise and demise of the horrendous phenomenon of the Islamic State, ISIS, Daesh? Generally speaking, the American invasion and subsequent withdrawal from Iraq broke down Saddam Hussein's power and security structures, and finally sent droves of unemployed strongmen into the arms of ISIS recruiters. The political and military void created in Iraq once the Americans withdrew is now filled by Iran, its arch enemy. A sanctions-ridden theocratic Iran has still managed to develop a nuclear program, which could possibly wreak havoc if it ever reaches fruition. Iran keeps Assad in power in Syria and has infiltrated Palestine via Hamas and Lebanon via Hezbollah. Iran now has a foothold in the Mediterranean and has also come to threaten and control the passage to the Red Sea by the Houthis, while it has been updating and upgrading its naval capabilities in the past decade or so. For a second time in the space of a few months, it has directly attacked Israel with rocket fire. Some have said that the Persian Empire is back to fight the West and is doing so with vengeance. At the same time, Russia is back. While currently preoccupied with the invasion of Ukraine and redrawing the map of Eurasia, let's not forget that Putin also supported Assad and that he, too, kept him in power, gaining a significant foothold in Syria, infiltrated by hundreds of Russian advisors, and realizing the dream of a warm water port in the Mediterranean by the naval base of Tartus, a dream held dear by a succession of tsars throughout history. Russia has an important role to play in Libya and has also been courting Turkey, militarily and otherwise, for years. China has been watching from the sidelines, abiding till its time comes. It keeps building a navy, keeping an eye on what is happening in our region, and probing when necessary Iranian and Russian ambitions in financial and other ways. By its Belt and Road Initiative, China is creating linkages that ensure that all roads could lead to Beijing in the near future. They certainly do so already in a large part of Africa, where China is helping explore and manage energy and natural resources. Attempts by the West, and more specifically the G7 and the EU, spearheaded by Ursula von der Leyen, attempts to counterweigh this with a so-called flagship project of infrastructure and development linkages named Global Gateway, have not met with success. The mere fact that Global Gateway is handled by technocrats with no EU heavyweight political figure to lead it and is categorized under development and aid rather than foreign policy is quite telling of the short-sightedness and subliminal post-colonial nuances of Brussels' policy towards Africa and the Middle East to this day. A few days ago, in the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly, China joined forces with Brazil to announce its Friends for Peace initiative, a collective platform of 17 countries to end the war in Ukraine, quote, with a more balanced, objective, and national perspective, taking into consideration the security interests of each country. That is, by allowing the war to end without Russia losing face, and without allowing the West and Ukraine to call the only shots in a peace effort. Turkey, a NATO member, has joined forces with China. Switzerland has also declared its interest in joining. This peace effort comes weeks after China managed to quietly broker a reconciliation deal between the two hitherto hostile Palestinian warring factions, Fatah, which controls the West Bank in the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas, or whatever is now left of it, which monopolized Gaza. This is the second quiet move that China has attempted in the Middle East. Let's remember how it brokered reconciliation between Iran and Saudi Arabia in 2023. Talking about Gaza, let's note that Israel has been acting in a way that it sees fit to protect its security interests and preserve the survival of the state of Israel with its attacks on Gaza and now Lebanon. Despite a lot of frowning and reprimanding by its still supportive, though, American allies, who have nevertheless failed to broker a ceasefire deal acceptable to all sides. Despite all efforts by Egypt, Jordan, and the UAE, which has publicly stated that it could even consider sending peacekeeping troops to Gaza should the Americans lead the way. For many in the international community, Israel is totally out of line as far as subsequent response to the Hamas attack is concerned, and the Americans are to blame for allowing this to happen. Others, though, will point that Israel is leading and the Americans are following a new state of affairs in the long-standing relationship. In any case, the war waged by Israel against Hamas is another issue of contention between Washington and some of its allies, with Mr. Erdogan, for example, vocally denouncing and criticizing Netanyahu and his government. Notably, while publicly the Arab world also seems to be up in arms over Gaza, the momentum of rapprochement between Israel and parts of the Arab world, set alive by the American-brokered Abraham Accords, is still going on, even if quietly. Following the money says so, and we can add Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Egypt and Jordan to UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. The above twists and turns that I have described to the unfolding story of a new Middle East are just a brief synopsis of how things are changing in our area, and of how the balance of power, with the ball having been firmly set in the American court for 30 years or so, will probably be no more. Admittedly, things will get worse before they get any better, while the Western camp seems to be lacking firm leadership and direction. The US will be dithering until about January, when a new administration sets in. Britain has its plate full with a new Labour government trying to put its own house in order first. France, a hitherto important player in the area, can only occasionally glimpse across Mediterranean waters to Lebanon and Libya. Macron seems to have lost much of his grandeur and political gravitas in the recent elections and the melee which followed. Germany and Scholz are facing similar troubles, with the German Chancellor at times speaking a different language from that of his foreign minister over intended policy. Brussels is continuing to be almost a non-entity as far as foreign and security policy is concerned. The EU is riddled with cleavages, stemming from domestic changes in political direction in a number of its members, as well as perspectives of national interest viewed differently from European capitals. This prevents Europe from having a consistent view on the future. The rise of importance of nationalist movements in Italy, France, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Slovakia, even Cyprus is quite telling. It's partly a response to cleavages brought about by irregular migration and the inability of local societies to absorb the vibrations of socioeconomic and cultural change and integrate newcomers. Such cleavages break down social cohesion. The absence of social cohesion breaks down endogenous resilience and multiplies insecurity coefficients in an inclusive security equation, where boundaries between external and internal security become quite muddled. Domestic terrorist attacks inspired and instigated from elsewhere are a good case in point. What is internal and what is external security? Hybrid attacks by the spreading of fake news and the meddling of local elections by foreign agents, we won't say who, is another case in point. Both attacks are made more possible and more effective in the absence of social cohesion. Now, why is this relevant to our story? Why do we care about that? The primacy of domestic policy often sets the scene for foreign policy, the two becoming increasingly intermingled. In an interdependent, globalized, and interconnected world, exogenous factors drive domestic policy as much as endogenous factors drive foreign policy. Trouble in the MENA region, for obvious reasons, reverberates in Europe. And Europe cannot be fixed unless we look outside it. Once we do, though, the picture is not very rosy. The Eastern Mediterranean region and the Middle East are hotspots of climate change, in some aspects affected more than other regions in the world. FAO estimates that the MENA region is in fact the most water-stressed region in the world, with 14 out of 17 most water-stressed countries in the world being in parts of it, including the top 6. According to the World Bank, MENA is also the only region in the world where poverty has increased in the last decade or so, jumping from 12.3% in 2010 to 18.1% in 2023. Poverty is correlated with lack of opportunities, high youth unemployment, restricted access to resources, and population displacement, precursors but also byproducts of conflict. In fact, according to the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law, there are currently 45 armed conflicts in progress in this very same region. Reports estimate that this accounts for approximately 15% of global conflict, while the region is home to only 5.5% of the world's population. MENA is home to both of two of the top 3 refugee-producing nations, namely Syria and Sudan, as well as 2 of the top 3 refugee hosting locations, Iran and Turkey. Probably this has now come to include Lebanon in both categories, with high associated costs to both host nations and the affected individuals. In a mutually reinforcing world where security begets prosperity and prosperity begets peace, the above is bad news. But the antidote to the region not faring very well is to try to connect it more, not less, by replacing negative spillover effects, which I have already described, with positive linkages, putting multiplier and accelerator effects to good use, and creating win-win situations for the players involved. Interconnectivity, both in practice and in principle, should be reinforced, not despite the geopolitical obstacles faced, but exactly because of them. As the sands are shifting, as a new balance of power is being created, as a new equilibrium is about to be established, we cannot ignore the realities around us. Conscious decision-making by conscious leaders sensitive to the benefits rather than the risks of interdependence and interconnectivity is absolutely essential for this to take place. The time is now, as more and more players are stepping in to redefine our region, to redefine the Middle East and the Mediterranean, to claim sea routes and airspace and energy resources. We cannot lay idle. We need to change before we have to, and we cannot do this alone. Thank you. Are there any questions? Should I be addressing questions now, or?